Hi everyone, I'm Anjana Arunkumar and I'll be presenting our paper, Image or Information, Examining the Nature and Impact of Visualization Perceptual Classification. Communicative visualizations are rhetorical devices that inform and convince an audience of an idea by amplifying cognition. These represent the bulk of exposure any individual has to visualizations. When determining the quality of a visualization, the purpose or designer intent has been studied in terms of cognitive and affective learning objectives. Concurrently, efforts have been made to define and evaluate the engagement, such as in Mahir et al., who posit that the degree of engagement increases as the user performs higher level cognitive tasks. Or effectiveness, based on prior work across domains like advertising, focusing on high ratings of aesthetic quality to promote visual exploration. Hay et al. Study aesthetic pleasure for visualizations in this manner using the Bovis scale. Finally, studies have demonstrated that some visualization types and visual elements are much more memorable than others. For example, human recognizable objects and color can increase the memorability of a visualization. However, the difference in the nature of charts studied through these different lenses poses challenges in reconciling good empirical results and rules of thumb with good examples of real world visualizations. So, to disentangle these confounding factors, we set out to answer a fundamental question. How do people actually internalize visualizations? As images or information? We define images as seeking to provide visual references, evoke emotions, express creativity, and inspire philosophic thought. Information visualization, on the other hand, focuses on presenting complex data in a clear and concise manner, promoting analytical thinking. While both use visual elements to convey meaning, they differ in their purpose and design. To obtain many real-world examples encompassing a breadth of visualization types, design aesthetics, and domains, we initially collect 500 data visualizations. We manually labeled visualizations using 5 expert annotators based on the visual taxonomy shown, synthesized from prior work by Borkin et al. And Bryan et al. We explicitly define expected level of engagement of the chart using part of Mahir's taxonomy. Post-annotation, we ran 2 experiments. In experiment 1 for each trial, participants were shown a visualization for 10 seconds, and they were asked to perform a rating task where they positioned the slider on a bilinear scale ranging from -10 that is image to +10 that is information. We find that participants have strong agreement in chart ratings, and this is done by randomly splitting participants into 2 independent groups for comparison with k equal to 25 to obtain high Spearman's correlation. We select a subset of 100 stimuli from the dataset as exemplar visualizations for experiment 2. Of the exemplars, 11 are extreme examples of image, that is I1, and 11 are of information, that is I5, and the other 78 are in between on the image information spectrum, sampled equally across the score intervals. Choosing them this way allows us to minimize the effects of different visual elements while minimizing bias. The exemplar visualizations shown exhibited the highest levels of inter-participant agreement within their respective score intervals, and here we show 30 such charts distributed amongst I1 to I5, where I1 is the most image-like and I5 is the most information-like. All 100 stimuli are rated first. On completion, participants then perform the recall task on 50 randomly selected stimuli, and recall trials are conducted as follows. For each trial, participants viewed a stimulus for 30 seconds. Then the screen was cleared and participants were given 15 seconds to explicitly report aesthetic pleasure, perceived ease of use, and sentiment about the visualization. Finally, participants were asked to orally describe what they remember and feel about the visualization they viewed in the trial for another 30 seconds. We see that older participants exhibit the highest inter-rater agreement across all score intervals, and the general effects of individual elements on the ratings is shown here, with the table depicting which elements are strongly affiliated with the 2 extremes versus those which have balanced effects or are seen to moderate the effects that are highly skewed in nature. For instance, the presence of axes and title drastically increase the informative ratings, potentially due to their presence rendering a given stimulus closer to the canonical representation an individual might hold of a particular chart type. We can further drill into this based on comparison between the visualization type and the rating score, given the individual impact that the design elements have on score. For instance, on average, we find that ratings are more information-like for bar, line, point, pie, and area charts, which are more commonly encountered and usually contain defined labeled axes and keys. But for charts like isotypes and maps, which are skeuomorphic in nature and often contain human recognizable glyphs or annotations, the scores are lower, and these charts are also less structured in nature and lack the axes and text labels. We identified various descriptive elements to flag and parse during the free recall, as shown in the table here. Here is an instance of how recall is tagged for a stimuli found to be highly image-like. In general, we find that image-rated visualizations focus on order of individual annotated data points, description of visual encoding appearance, positive or neutral opinion on the aesthetic appeal of encoding choices, and stating the data domain and reporting moderate to high difficulty of understanding the nuances. Such charts therefore seek to expose, and in some cases involve, the user in performing low-level tasks related to data interpretation as per Mahir's taxonomy. Parallelly, here is the recall tag for a highly informative chart. Here, recall focuses on the title or message of the visualization, text label annotations, reporting high ease of use, observed trend, etc., and stating the presence of highlight or overlay annotations and chart type. Such charts therefore seek to involve the user in performing tasks to analyze the data trends and generate higher level chart takeaways. We further juxtapose the rating scores against those collected for aesthetic pleasure, perceived ease of use, and sentiment prior to recall. We can summarize the results as follows. Emotion-based aesthetic scores are higher when stimuli are perceived as more image-like. Data aesthetic scores are higher when stimuli are perceived as more informational. Older participants show greater variation in emotion aesthetics ratings between I1 to I5. Sentiment and perceived ease of use are proportional to emotional aesthetic scores. Feeling guided is proportional to data aesthetic scores. And specifically for the feeling guided ratings, these display the most equivalence between the two participant groups and show the highest range of variation across I1 to I5. We also find a conflict between designer intent and viewer internalization in some cases. Experts annotate visualizations by considering them from a designer's perspective. How would a user respond emotionally to these visuals, and how engaging would they find them? And experts regard the more informative visualizations as those which are more positive, but participants rate them as more neutral or negative. We thus offer quantitative evidence supporting traditional guidelines for designing and presenting visualizations. Our high-level insights can be summarized as follows. Visualizations perceived as images may be less efficacious for communicating trends and messages, although they tend to evoke a more positive emotional response. On the other hand, informative visualizations focus on annotation-based recall and receive more positive design evaluations. Redundancy improves the quality of both design and emotional response. And finally, embellishing familiar charts can preserve the perceived communicative utility and increase emotional response for a chart. Finally, a visualization can have high aesthetic impact while leading to varying levels and quality of analytical insights, and we therefore chose a bilinear scale for image information, primarily due to a lack of vocabulary to define something with a purely sensory impact and no informational value in terms of visuals. As this work is exploratory, future studies can better study competing and nuanced considerations. While participants rate prior to verbal recall, we didn't analyze the recall against each of these individual ratings, though we do observe broad general trends. In the future, we also intend to code and analyze recall data, as well as use more fine-grained definitions, measures of abstract concepts like visual density and data scale to better understand specific subtleties in various subtypes of visualizations. We also plan to investigate the impact of time on the quality of visualization recall and demonstrate in future work how the nature of internalization significantly affects comprehension and how this in turn can lead to mind wandering. Lastly, we plan to design and evaluate interaction techniques that can help intrinsically resolve user uncertainty when exploring image-like visualizations to boost analytical engagement while maintaining emotional engagement. Thank you.